Hey guys, today we're going to talk about Lesson 1-5, Graphing and Comparing Ratio Tables. This is 11-7-19. And just to let you know, this is not covered on the quiz that you'll be taking tomorrow, Friday, on Chapter 1, which only covers up through Lesson 1-4. But I didn't want to get too far into next week and get behind. So here we go. First thing I want to do is just kind of review graphing a little bit with you. I know that your graph is going to look a lot bigger because of the size of what our foldable was, but I'm going to do my best to put things on here. So a couple of things we're going to learn is basically how do we graph in a graph that looks like this, and also what are important things I'm looking for, things like that. So first off, we need to make sure that we all understand the language. So first thing is you need to notice that this is called the x-axis, and it is the horizontal axis. I remember it because it goes across the paper, x across, get it? And then it's like the horizon is horizontal. The guy over on the other side, he is our y-axis, and he's the vertical axis. Okay, so he's standing to attention. Now, where these two axes meet in this particular one is called the origin. So right there, that's the origin. It's the beginning of all of our graphing. And while this is not a complete graph, because in a coordinate plane you actually have 4 sections, this is the one that you guys have focused in the most through your education. And I am going to tell you in a little bit later, you guys are going to learn how to graph in all 4 sections. Yes, very exciting. But this is the first one, so we call him quadrant 1. And for whatever reasons, we use Roman numerals. Now, what's significant about ordered pairs that you would graph in quadrant 1 is both the x value and the y value are positive. So let's talk about how do we actually physically graph. Now, my little boxes are really small, so I'm probably not going to get everything I want in them, so I'm probably going to spill outside of them, but that's okay. So we have 2 guys here. We have the x coordinate, and we have the y coordinate. Okay. When I'm graphing, I'm always going to graph the x coordinate first, which then means I'm going to be graphing the y coordinate second. Okay, so how do I actually graph? Let's see what I can get into this little box. From the origin, and if you need to spill out, don't worry about it, do that. Yeah, I'm not going to fit it all in. From the origin, move to the x value, or the x coordinate, we could say. Now, there's 2 ways to move. Now, for us, we're only dealing with positives, but as we get into all 4 quadrants, this can happen. We're going to move right when our x is a positive, and we're going to move left from the origin when our x is a negative. Okay? Now, notice I'm not saying make any marks. I just said move there. Okay? Now, on the second side, from the x value, so that's now our starting point, we're going to move to the y value. Now I'm going to write off to the side what can happen. So we can either move up if our y is positive, or we can move down from that x value if the y value is negative. Once you do all of that, the last thing you get to do is mark the point. okay? So I didn't get to do any graphing until I went through those 2 steps, okay? So how does this relate to graphing and comparing ratio tables? Well, remember we've been talking about ratio tables, which is basically every pairing of numbers, if I simplify them, would equal the same ratio. So it's equivalent ratios that are in a ratio table, okay? So what we can do is take the information we're given and we can graph it and then describe what we're seeing. All right, let's go to the next page. Oh, one other thing to point out, notice that you have numbers written on the axes. That's important. So on the next page, we're going to do an example, and I'm going to show you how to graph appropriately. Okay, so first off, when I'm given a ratio table, I'm going to take the ratio table and write each ratio as an ordered pair. And you can see in our particular ratio table, this one about Gloria's earnings, they've actually created a 3rd column in our ratio table, and they have done just that, already created the ordered pairs for us. We can do that if they don't give that to us, or or not. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to graph each ordered pair. Now we're not going to connect them, we're just going to graph the independent points. And then the last thing we need to do is we're going to describe the pattern. Describe the pattern the graph makes. Okay, so when we get to that part, which is going to be in our example here, part B, I'm going to write my response, and I'm going to put in parentheses what question are you actually answering from that response. Okay, so let's start with part A, and I'm going to do part A to the right of my graph. Okay, so part A says the table shows Gloria's earnings for 1, 2, and 3 hours. The table also lists this information as ordered pairs: hours, earnings. So notice hours comes first, so in an ordered pair that's X. Earnings comes second, so in an ordered pair that represents Y. Okay, so again, I'm just going to kind of write that underneath here. There's your X, and there's your Y. So that's, the words are in the order of the coordinates. Okay. First, they want us to graph the ordered pairs, and then they want us to describe the pattern in the graph. Okay, so when I'm getting ready to build a graph, first thing I'm looking at is how big do my X's get versus how big my Y's get. So I know my X's go up to 3, and I know my Y's go up to 15. So my Y-axis is going to have to be substantially long. Okay, so, and my X-axis doesn't need to be so long. So let's see if I can do that. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. And so then I'm going to number every other number: 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. So notice that I do have tick marks. So even if I'm using graph paper, I still darken in the tick marks. Now I'm going to put the intermediate numbers. Now, the great thing about doing graphs on graph paper is all the lines are there for you so that everything gets spread out evenly. When we freehand a graph, like I'm doing right now, sometimes things get a little messy. Now, I can notice the spacing I have for my y-axis. I can do my spacing for my x-axis slightly differently. I can spread it out a little bit more. Again, I'm just going to do every other number. So that's the frame of this. Next, I better make sure that I label my x-axis x and my y-axis y. If I don't, I'm going to take points off. Okay, so everything you're seeing is what I expect. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to read the graph. And it had a title called Gloria's Earnings. So my overall graph is going to get titled Gloria's Earnings. Okay. Next, I need to title my x-axis. So let's go ahead and find its title, and it's going to be hours. Okay. Now I'm going to look for my y-axis, and it's going to be called dollars earned. So what I do is I turn my graph sideways, and I write so the words are parallel to the axis. Dollars earned. Okay? Now I've prepped my graph, and this is what I expect to see from you guys. Title on each of the axes labeled X and Y, tick marks, and every other number. When you try to put every number on there, it makes a big mess. So try to avoid that if you can. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and graph. So my ordered pairs are 1, 5. So here's 1, here's 5. 2, 10. So here's 2 and 10. And 3, 15, 3 and 15. So just to let you know, in the locker, we have some sheets of graphs that you can print out and use in your homework. So they're already kind of done for you with all the lines, so it makes it a little easier to graph. So you can always print those out. Okay, so that's all I'm supposed to do for part A. Now comes part B. And for part B, remember, I'm going to be describing the pattern in the graph. And this is what I'm going to write in black, my description, but in a different color, what is the question that I'm answering. So a lot of times these graphs are going to, or these responses, these explanations are going to be the same for all of these. So first thing I would notice is that the points appear to form a line. Now, what I'm answering is this. What does the graph look like? Now, just to let you know, when we're doing these ratio tables, I'm consistently moving the same amount every time since the ratios are all the same. So if it doesn't look like a line, hint, hint, you've done something wrong. Okay? The next sentence in my explanation would be, each point is 1 to the right and 5 up from the last point. Now you might say, how on earth did you get that? Well, if I look, I move 1 to the right and I move 5 up. I moved 1 to the right and I moved 5 up. That's where I'm getting that idea from. So what am I answering here? What does the point do? Or what does each point do? In other words, how does it move from one point to the next? From one point to the next. Okay. Now, what we're just discovering right here, that 1 to the right and 5 up, This is what's called the common ratio. In other words, if I took every single one of those ratios and reduced them to lowest terms, I would get one right, or I would get this one. This would be my ratio, 1 to 5, okay? That's your common ratio. So that's what the next sentence is. Then you have one more. What does that 1 to the right, 5 up mean? So that's when we include now the labels that we see in our graph. This means Gloria earns $5 for every hour she works. You could also say, this means for every hour Gloria works, she earns $5. And then the numbers are 1 to 5. So whatever you want to do here. So basically, at this point, this is when you explain the ratio. What do the numbers 1 and 5 mean? Now, this totally makes sense that this forms a line because she gets paid the same amount of money for every hour that she works. Okay? All right, I'm going to pause here, and I may create a second video that you can watch as well, and because this is enough for right now. All right, have a great day, guys. We'll talk about this on Tuesday, okay? Bye now.